I want to tell you a story of the greatest joke on all of science in all of history, because you'll never understand Tesla till you know this joke.
This retired lieutenant colonel had access to the real Tesla files, the ones the public was never meant to see. What he discovered was so disruptive, intelligence agencies watched his every move for the rest of his life.
By the way, it's a pleasure to do this because I would like to see Tesla get some decent press.
Yeah, that's what we call it.
We've tracked down a rare recording of Colonel Thomas Bearden, the physicist who claimed the lost equations were no accident. He said they were stolen, buried, and guarded because they unlock forces that could heal, transmit disease, or even bend space-time itself.
Think for a moment of the service that the limited electromagnetics we have has been put to. Think of all the electronics, the communication industry, the power systems. It's changed the life of every person on the face of the earth. Consider for just a moment what an extension to what you can do can add to the benefit of everybody, everywhere, for all time. And I think when one ponders and considers that implication, then the full importance and the full implication of Nikola Tesla, yet to be realized, will indeed be realized.
Before we go further, understand this. What you're about to hear from this retired colonel will shock you. He spoke about technologies that could heal, transmit disease, and even bend space-time itself. Let's rewind back to 19th century science. James Clerk Maxwell stood before a tangled web of equations, 20 unknowns describing the raw living force of electromagnetism. His math was heavy, written in quaternions, an advanced language few dared to understand. But what it captured was wild. Hidden interactions, deeper dimensions, the strange behavior of energy that didn't fit inside neat boxes. But then came Oliver Heaviside, a self-taught genius in his own right. Heaviside looked at Maxwell's complexity and trimmed it down. 4 simplified vector equations replaced the original 20. Cleaner, simpler, easier to teach. Textbooks hailed it as progress, but in doing so, something else happened. Entire layers of physical reality were written out of science. Gone were the extra variables, the strange symmetries, the unseen forces. And Tom Bearden didn't mince words. He called it castration. What we use today as Maxwell's equations are only a shadow of what Maxwell actually proposed.
The original electromagnetics written by Maxwell himself was written in an algebra called quaternions. What we mean here is a higher topology algebra in which you can do things in this kind of expression of electromagnetics that you can't do in vectors or tensors. Now, the real theory that Maxwell had, depending on who counts the equations and what they count, is something like 20 equations and 20 unknowns, to give some numbers to it. When Heaviside got through translating it into a much simpler algebra called vectors, which he helped create, and he wrote all the modern equations that are used as Maxwell's equations, not Maxwell himself. None of those ever appeared in anything by James Clerk Maxwell. When Heaviside modified it to a much easier algebra called vector analysis, which he helped complete the algebra itself, it consisted of some 2 equations or so with an extra equation thrown in, depending on the way you want to count that again. Certainly, if you want to count the full thing, 4 equations. So you can see a remarkable reduction in the amount of variations of things you could do. And that's what I mean when I say we previously had an electromagnetics that permitted lots of functioning that is no longer permitted by the kind of electromagnetics we're all taught to apply and use today. It's a subset of what can be done.
He warned the cut was a lock on a hidden door. Once science learned to erase what didn't fit, the pattern spread. And the next thing they chose to silence was far more dangerous. The other half of every wave that moves through our world. Think about it. When a string is struck, one wave travels down it, sharp, visible, full of motion. But something else stirs beneath it. A second wave, quieter, dampened, hidden inside the instrument's body. Physicists knew this. But when they wrote the wave equations that power nearly every machine in the modern world, they tossed out the silent half, the anti-wave. Not because it didn't exist, but because it complicated the math. The result? Every generation of scientists has been taught to throw away half of physical reality without even realizing it. Tom Bearden called it the greatest joke in science, because for over 100 years, students have been solving equations built on a lie.
Let's look now and see if there's any room for what Tesla was saying. And I want to tell you a story of the greatest joke on all of science in all of history, because you'll never understand Tesla till you know this joke. When they were trying to write the wave equation for the plucked string wave, of course they were studying plucked stringed instruments. You have a taut string suspended between 2 points, in the body of an instrument, and they simply plucked the string in various ways and watched the waves. They then wrote equations for the tensile forces and so forth in the string. They isolated the string. They assumed that there's nothing else happening but the string. And using the forces, and they still teach the sophomore students to do it this way, they derived the string wave equation. First of all, there is no such thing as a tight string independently existing apart from a holder anywhere in the world. There never will be. There is, however, a tight string which has equal and opposite forces in the ends of the holder that's holding the string and creating the tension on the string. If you will apply the same approach and ask yourself the full question, what system was perturbed? It was not just the tight string. It was the tight string plus the body of the instrument. What comes about is that every transverse string wave that occurred in the string, an equal and opposite highly damped wave occurred down in the body of the instrument. Every guitar picker, which I'm a very poor one, knows that the body of the instrument vibrates when you pluck the string. You depend on the characteristic of that for your sound. What happened, though, by throwing away the holder and the anti-wave in the holder, every time a mathematician or a physicist writes a wave equation, he has thrown away half of the problem of the phenomena. The anti-wave still exists, but he threw it somewhere, usually into a highly damped system, and ignores it. The way he gets by with that, at the end, where he has now described his reactions with the single wave equation, the transverse wave equation, the other wave reappears, and he says, oh, that's Newton's third law reaction force, because it's always equal and opposite. Well, Newton's third law is not a law, it's a description. It is not a mechanism for what causes something at all. If you add back in the wave that is missing, guess what you get? You get equal and opposite waves in the vacuum. These waves are in fact longitudinal waves. They are more sound-like, and Tesla was right, and all the textbooks in the world are wrong.
The anti-wave didn't vanish. It dropped beneath the surface, into the vacuum, silent, invisible, but still alive. Modern quantum theory tells us the vacuum is anything but empty. A boiling storm of activity lives there. So what exactly did we silence when we cut those waves in half? If the missing wave is still humming in the dark, could it be more than just noise? Could it be power we were never meant to use? And if that hidden wave is still echoing beneath reality, then someone had to notice it. Someone had to hear what the rest of science chose to ignore. And one man did, and he swore the vacuum itself was alive. His name was Nikola Tesla. While the world applauded Hertz's discovery of transverse EM waves, Tesla stood alone. He declared the entire theory false. He believed the vacuum wasn't a dead void, but a living medium, pulsing like a gas. Not sideways ripples, but longitudinal waves. Compression and release, like sound traveling through fog. To everyone else, this was fantasy, but Tesla had seen it. He started to build machines that didn't follow Hertz's laws. His waves were different, deeper, stranger, and full of potential. And while the textbooks dismissed him as deluded, something else happened in the background. Quietly, quantum physicists began describing the vacuum as a virtual particle flux, a seething sea of activity, eerily close to Tesla's own words. They used a new language, but the idea was old. Tesla's idea.
It was deeply involved in it. Tesla made several statements, for example, over and over, where he said, there are no transverse waves in the vacuum, no Hertz waves. The waves in the vacuum, I have already proved, he said, is like a gas. And the waves in it, therefore, are like sound waves. They're longitudinal waves. And he was indeed correct. Today, for example, in modern quantum mechanics, there is a vacuum, it is a medium, and it's a virtual particle flux. And so, indeed, the vacuum is a virtual gas by today's best physics. And Tesla was right. It is a longitudinal wave.
If Tesla was right about the waves in the vacuum, then the next question isn't whether they exist, it's what can be done with them. And Bearden claimed the answer was terrifying. Energy that doesn't just move, but hunts. Not all beams scatter. Some fight their way back. In optics labs, a phenomenon called phase conjugation showed that a distorted beam could reverse itself, retracing its path as if it remembered where it came from. Tom Bearden pushed this further. He claimed Tesla had already weaponized the effect, not with light, but with raw energy. Beams, he said, could pierce the Earth and lock onto targets with unnatural precision.
So by self-targeting, I can hold a laser beam on a point. It doesn't have to be a booster, a defense, or anything. I can hold a beam of energy onto a point that I have at a distance. That's the main thing by self-targeting. And in my own opinion, I reached the opinion that Tesla, in his telegeodynamics, had discovered how to do that with the mechanical waves. First of all, he could transmit the full wave through the Earth, and he could cause the thing when it came back to be phase conjugated. Once he had a reflection from anywhere, he could narrow immediately into that point and put all his energy to that point. And today, there is a theoretical basis for it. I couldn't build such equipment, but I mean, there's a theoretical way to go to do that. And apparently, according to his statements, that's my interpretation of what he was doing. He was doing iterative phase conjugation and therefore able to focus his energy, regardless of what kind of route it followed, to the exact point he wanted it to go to on the other side of the Earth.
Bearden believed Tesla's lost experiments may have been real demonstrations of self-targeting energy weapons, capable of seeking out reflection points anywhere on the globe. And one of those points, he suggested, may have been a remote patch of forest in 1908 Siberia, Tunguska.
Because of certain time sequences of some of his statements and incidents which actually happened, I think as a last desperate measure, while his installation at Long Island was still intact and still in operation, I believe he fired the electrical pulse of energy that blew down that forest in Siberia. Oliver Nicholson has done some very good work, for example, to look at the admittedly circumstantial evidence. We can't prove it at all. I just happen to hold to the thesis that it was his last-ditch effort to try to solve his problems that he'd lost with Morgan by focusing attention onto the absolute power that could be unleashed with this. And it failed. Nobody was interested.
The devastation was real. The cause? Still covered up. But the idea that energy could hunt, that could think, stuck like a splinter. And imagine if Tesla knew this energy could fire a beam through the Earth and have it return home like a guided ghost. Then what kind of power were they playing with? And why hasn't the world admitted it? And then, in the late 1970s, shortwave radio operators across the world began hearing it. An eerie mechanical tapping. Rhythmic, relentless. Tap, tap, tap. It cut through conversations, music, and military channels alike. No one knew where it came from, but soon, all fingers pointed to the Soviet Union. Moscow eventually confirmed the source, a massive over-the-horizon radar array near Chernobyl called the Duga system. They said it was part of a Cold War early warning network, designed to detect incoming missiles before they crossed Soviet airspace. But some experts weren't convinced. The power required to broadcast that far, and with such strange interference, was extreme.
There's been a lot of discussion on it, and, I guess the official realization was that, or calling it, was to say it's just simply over-the-horizon radars. Well, they built a lot of them. But if you look at it through the eyes of the scalar interferometry, and I mentioned the two references and have cited them in various papers, there are other work along that line too. If that approach is used in what seems to be what Tesla had done, if you use the Tesla approach to interpret it, now one is dealing with scalar interferometry and dealing with something that can do some rather astounding potential weapon effects. With the Tesla interpretation, one of the things that would result from that line of weapons, assuming they are used as scalar interferometry weapons, one of the great things that would emerge from them would be to produce controlled energy at a distance. For example, great huge balls of controlled electromagnetic energy, or if you pulse it, great blasts of electromagnetic energy at a distance. I mentioned the business of biasing the transmitters, where you can produce either heat, like an explosion, or you could produce a cold explosion, the sudden explosive withdrawal of energy from the distant area. And in books cited incidents that are representative of what one would find if those incidents actually were occurring on that kind of scale. The incidents are there, they're real, they're documented, they're not just Tom Bearden. So there is a good solid set of admittedly circumstantial evidence that the woodpecker signals, because of all the phenomena that can be associated in the same time frame since they turned on, these phenomena very strongly suggest that this set of weapons is not just over-the-horizon radars at all, but are really Tesla weapon systems. And if they are, all the rest follows.
Bearden believed this wasn't just a radar system. It was a series of tests involving scalar electromagnetic weapons, tools that could create artificial fireballs in the sky, trigger sudden temperature changes, and even influence biological systems from a distance. Mainstream scientists dismissed it all, but the tapping never stopped. And those who listened closely felt there was more buried inside the signal than just static. And if those signals could stir the sky and twist the weather, who's to say they couldn't reach even deeper, into living cells themselves? In a Soviet lab in Novosibirsk, 2 jars of living cells sat side by side. One was infected with a deadly virus, the other completely untouched. No shared air, no contact, just a thin pane of glass and a beam of light between them. Then the impossible happened. The second jar began to sicken. The disease seemed to leap across space, carried not by particles, but by electromagnetic fields.
There is a Soviet physicist, scientist named Kosnashev. And Kosnashev has produced a series of experiments in 2 Soviet military institutes before the fall there that showed that you could transmit any sort of disease form between cells. Any sort of infectious disease, or you can radiate one sample with nuclear radiation, gamma radiation, for example, or deadly poison, or infect them with viruses. You can transmit between cellular cultures into another cell, another sample from the same culture, the same disease electromagnetically, although the organisms won't necessarily be there. That works in literature if you pursue it. Kosnashev has several books out now that are available since the Russian system has loosened up a bit. That work has been replicated at the University of Marburg, for example, in Germany. It has been replicated at University of Sydney in Australia, and it has been replicated by at least one researcher here in the United States. He's trained to say if there are no force fields, there's no electromagnetics. He ignores the potential that's left. He just sweeps it away and throws it away. From where we're coming from with the Tesla approach, that is the active part. That's the part that is being interfered within the bodies or whatever to cause whatever you wish to cause. If we couple it with the Kosnashev stuff, we are saying that such scalar transmitters in interferometry within the U.S. Embassy could indeed have produced any sort of disease they wish. However, it would have very strange signatures.
A.V. Kazantsev repeated the experiment thousands of times. Some trials failed, but too many worked to ignore. Later, a handful of German and Australian labs reported the same disturbing results. Others denied it outright, but the question never went away. If sickness can jump the gap, what else might travel on those hidden currents? If the invisible fields could whisper death from one jar to another, then what else could they carry? And more importantly, what would happen if someone learned to bend those same forces towards life instead? In the back rooms of 1960s Bordeaux, a strange machine hummed like something out of science fiction. Its creator, Antoine Pryor, wasn't a doctor, but what his device did left scientists stunned. Lab animals with deadly tumors were placed inside its electromagnetic field. Days later, the tumors shrank. Some even disappeared. Reports from the French Academy of Sciences confirmed it. This machine was triggering the immune system, fighting disease without surgery or drugs. It should have changed medicine forever, but it didn't. Politics shifted, funding collapsed, and the device was dismantled.
The medical approach, if you use the extended electromagnetics, if I may use that term, that Tesla was talking about, there then occurs phenomena which can be used to control and change and heal almost any infectious disease whatsoever, including a genetic disease such as where the genetics have changed in the cells, such as AIDS. Now that is not an idle statement. That is a very rigorous statement based on some very rigorous scientific work done in France in the late 60s and early 70s by Antoine Priori and a team of scientists that gathered and worked with him. And these were eminent scientists, world known. For example, one of them was Robert Courier, head of the biology section of the French Academy of Science, and also the Secretary Perpetuel of the French Academy at the same time.
Prior died, and with him, the secret of how it worked. Some dismissed it as a hoax. Others swore it was decades ahead of its time. And yet, the files remain. The results remain. Proof of a cure that slipped through humanity's fingers. If a single machine could shrink tumors and then vanish from history, what else has been buried? Bearden warned the prior device was only a glimpse, that the real prize wasn't healing at all, but Tesla's findings, the endless rivers of power flowing through the vacuum itself.
So we find then later references to Tesla which suggest the harnessing of energy from, today we would say, from the vacuum. So does that sound reasonable to us today from where I'm coming from? Yes, indeed, because that's exactly what we have done. We take it in the potential across the source. We simply use the hidden wave flow from the Whittaker stuff. We want to extract that and use it in this displacement current form while it's still energy flow and none of it's being lost. We do not wish to make work until we store it up and discharge it in the load separately. We do it just like a heat pump. And I really think that's probably the way Tesla did it in that car engine. He also knew there was enormous energy in what was called cosmic rays, and he connected that with the whole idea of the energetic vacuum, we would say today. And I think that's just one of the ways he referred to it. For example, we know from T. Henry Morey's work that he was inspired by Tesla's statement that the energy of the ether itself was literally filled with rivers of energy free for the taking. It inspired him in his great undertaking.
But here's the catch. Our machines aren't designed to see it. Our circuits were built to pull from the grid, not the cosmos. Worse, Bearden claimed the silence around this energy wasn't an accident. Oil, nuclear, and defense industries had no interest in a world where power came freely from space. So the vacuum remained untapped. Not because we couldn't, but because we weren't allowed. And if they could silence the vacuum itself, what chance did a single man have? In January 1943, a frail Nikola Tesla was found dead in room 3327 of the New Yorker Hotel. He died alone with a stack of notebooks and half-finished blueprints beside him. Within hours, agents from the US government arrived and seized every paper, every sketch, every trace. The man sent to evaluate them? John G. Trump, an MIT electrical engineer. And his final assessment was that the documents held no practical value. To some, that ended the story.
Science itself is unforgiving. There's many histories of scientists' persecution of other scientists with whom they disagreed. The system is very prone to either destroy, condemn, or bury any scientist who seriously disagrees with it to this day. Well documented. We could make another documentary movie on just that. However, here was a preeminent example of a disagreement with the current scientific control. And the scientific control was adamant that he get wiped out of the books and he get labeled a lunatic, and that's exactly what happened. He wound up with his name, Tesla, attached to a coil, and one unit of measurement named after his name. And as far as the scientist was concerned, that was enough. He didn't deserve anything else, most of them. So the scientific community rejected him. After Morgan turned his back, the financial community rejected him. Here was a loner then again, absolute loner. What was he to do? Exactly what he did, retire to his hotel room and feed the pigeons and think grand dreams. Live on a small pittance which kept life and limb together from his native Yugoslavia. And once a year have a press conference where he spoke of all the grand things that he thought of and he wished to have happened. But at least overtly, as far as we know overtly, never again was Nikola Tesla to ever have a chance to attempt any of the great things that always surged through his restless mind.
But to others, including Bearden, it marked the start of something darker. What if that phrase was a smokescreen? What if those papers held secrets that could shatter entire industries? Free energy would erase the need for oil. Scalar tech could destabilize nuclear superpowers without firing a missile. And for the same reason, the safest way to manage such power wasn't to develop it, it was to bury it in vaults, behind laws, beneath layers of ridicule. You want the truth? This was never just about equations on a blackboard. It was about control, about erasing the one thing that could rewrite everything we know. Energy without fuel, healing without medicine, weapons that don't need bombs. Bearden called it a razor sharp enough to cut through space-time itself. He said it bends reality, not metaphorically, literally. And if you twist the fabric of space wrong, it doesn't just snap back, it tears. Biological shockwaves, dimensional fractures, things we haven't even named yet. So maybe that's why Tesla's papers vanished the night he died. Maybe that's why Pryor's device was gutted and buried. Maybe it was never about the tech. It was about who gets to decide if humanity is ready to play with the fuse box of the universe. Now, you've seen the breadcrumbs. The question is no longer if this knowledge exists. The question is, should this power belong to all of us, or stay buried forever? You decide. Drop your thoughts below, because if Bearden was right, this choice may not stay theoretical much longer.